Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and the discussion that you are about to see was one that I recorded a few weeks back with my dear friend, our good dear friend, the one, the only, Mr. Brian Saur. And the topic of conversation that day was Brian's picks or selections with respect to the great filmography of the one, the only Brian De Palma. So it was Brian's selections regarding the films of Brian De Palma. Now, we have done our best, or we did our best in that conversation to try to avoid plot specifics or spoiler discussions. Again, we didn't want to spoil it for anyone who maybe has not yet seen any of these Brian De Palma films that we were indeed talking about during this conversation, which I had a really fun time with, by the way. It was great to hear what Brian had to say. It was wonderful to get his selections and to respond to his great comments on the selected works of De Palma. So I had such a great time talking with our dear friend Brian Saur. But as I say, we did our best, Brian and I, we did our best to try to avoid plot spoiler discussions, again, for the benefit of those who have not yet seen any of these great De Palma works. So we did touch a little bit on some general plot points, and so maybe not even, well, maybe very general or very mild discussions, but again, we did not go into any specific details, and so in that way we try to keep it as general as possible, again, for the benefit of those who have yet to see these great works of De Palma. So in that spirit, my dear friends, here is our discussion, Brian Saur and me, where we talk about Brian's picks and Brian's selections regarding the works of De Palma. I hope you enjoy, my friends. I'll see you at the next one. Cheers. Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I am very happy today because we are joined once again with a dear friend of this channel, dear friend of all of us, and a wonderful example of a film enthusiast extraordinaire and a wonderful human being and just a delightful person. So here we have, once again, joining us, the one and only Mr. Brian Saur. Brian.
Daisuke, that, as usual, an incredibly gracious and too kind of an introduction. Hugely appreciated, and thank you for having me back.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. The pleasure is all mine. And the reason why we have decided, or we have come together like this, is we wanted to, or I wanted to hear from you about the topic which we will talk about today. And that topic is the works of Brian De Palma, right? So we were talking offline about our mutual admiration for the works of De Palma, Brian De Palma. And so we thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if we had a discussion? And so here we are, face to face, over the virtual space once again. So the topic for today is Brian De Palma films. So I'm very excited for this, very excited.
Yeah, no, he is truly he's become one of my all-timers over my lifetime as a film fan. And I know you feel the same way. Like, in fact, I would say you are even a bigger De Palma fan than I am, because there are some of his more recent films that I have yet to see that I know you have seen, and from what I gather, have a good deal of respect for, even the ones that are considered lesser films of his.
Well, he certainly has a very expansive filmography, that's for sure. And maybe his career can be divided up into, say, periods or eras, or maybe decades or groupings or whatever. But I think it's a testament to how vast and various his actual filmography is. And so there's a lot to examine and to explore and to enjoy. So that's
Yeah, that's certainly the case. But Brian De Palma, no, yeah, it's wonderful, and many examples of his works, say physical media, as you know, there's a lot of examples, many multiple versions of the same film, etc., from different all across the world, etc. So a lot to talk about here. But I suppose let's just go right into it. And so maybe could I ask you, my dear friend Brian, so just maybe just general impressions, maybe introductory statements from you about your impressions, your feelings about Brian De Palma's works overall, and then we can get started. So how do you feel about De Palma's works overall?
I think he is a truly remarkable filmmaker who, in hindsight, grows more and more in my esteem all the time, partially because he is such a visual stylist and has always been a guy who is about, how do I tell this story in a way that's not me talking to the camera, that's not me imposing dialogue on my actors to explain things to you. I'd much rather show you. And even if that ends up being a really complicated shot, or me having to figure out a way to show you multiple points of view at the same time by using techniques that I, as De Palma, love, such as a split screen technique or a split diopter technique, or long take steady cam shots. He just is so much about the visual storytelling. He's so much about taking advantage of the medium and all that it has to offer as a storyteller. And I just feel like, beyond maybe Scorsese for me, in terms of careers that are dedicated to cinematic storytelling. I mean, Hitchcock, obviously we know he's inspired by Hitchcock. And I've often called him like an acolyte or, a devotee. And I've really come to realize that that is underselling him in a way, because it makes it sound like he's a ripoff artist. And I really think he is, like Scorsese, able to take those things from Hitchcock and just ideas, cinematic visual ideas, and just spin them out into his own, wonderful brew, if you will. And so he's just really one of those guys that I've always loved, his ability to tell stories and his commitment to it. And yeah, and just going through these movies again, it's also really interesting to see, as you said, the periods and phases that he has in his career. I think it's a really fascinating filmography to talk about. And I share a birthday with him, so I've got a personal connection on top of everything else.
Oh, yes. And also a first name as well.
Exactly. First name and birthday.
Yes, that's wow. Well said, my dear. Well done. So I think in that spirit, my dear friend, now let us speak about some of your favorites or some of your picks from the works of De Palma. And so I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you, my dear friend, for your highlights or your picks or your suggestions or discussion points, taking us through a guided tour, guided by you, my dear friend, through the works of De Palma. So make stops along the way wherever you like. So, my dear friend, what are some of the works of De Palma that you'd like to share with us today? Where would you like to begin?
Let's start, towards the beginning. Okay. I'd like to approach this chronologically to show, in some respects, the variety and the phases that we talked about, and how he goes from like doing one specific kind of thing to some other kinds of things, while still, back to Hitchcock briefly, he uses a lot of visual techniques, and then there's certain films that, like Psycho and Vertigo, that struck such a chord with him in terms of their thematics and the story bits, that's the stuff I feel like maybe people come back to the Hitchcock comparison a lot, because they'll say, oh, here he's doing Psycho, here he's doing Vertigo again, that stuff. But again, I always feel like he's weaving it into something else that he's doing. He's extending it. He's taking those ideas but anyway, we'll get to that in a minute, because I feel like the early stuff, he's not quite there yet. And one of my first favorites of his is his film Hi Mom from 1970, which is part of a period of, I think Tarantino called Greetings, the film he did prior to, one of the films he did prior to this, he called it little hippie movies that he did. And I think that's an interesting observation. That kind of is what Greetings is. And I do think Greetings works as part of a period when I believe he said something along the lines of wanting to be the American Jean-Luc Godard. So it's a very energetic, jump cutty comedy, mostly about three guys trying to avoid the draft. I think it's intriguing mostly because of an early performance from Robert De Niro. And I think that's another thing that's interesting about De Palma that people don't often fully connect anymore, is that it was De Palma who came to De Niro first. And yes, we associate Scorsese with De Niro in tandem, I think cinematically, probably forever. But De Palma was sort of the guy who discovered him in a way. He uses him in several early films, including Greetings, where he's one of the standouts in Greetings. So he does Greetings. It's successful. I think it's interesting, but there's some things about it that have dated for me that I don't love as much. But Hi Mom is his follow-up to Greetings. He basically calls it Son of Greetings in some cases. And you mentioned physical media. There's a great DVD Blu-ray set from Arrow that's the early De Palma films and includes Greetings, Wedding Party, and Hi Mom. And it's a really nice set that you can get from Arrow, and I wholly recommend that. But Hi Mom is just fascinating because it is taking some of what the character in Greetings is doing. He's a Vietnam vet, and he's come back, and he takes on this idea of filming people. He meets up with a sleazy producer played by Alan Garfield, who I believe is reprising his character from a cameo role in Greetings, where they just meet each other and Garfield's trying to sell him pornographic movies on the street. And it feels like all these early films feel very improvised in their dialogue, and they feel very loose. And I like that feeling. It's something he wouldn't do as much later. I associate much more of that loose improvisational feeling with Scorsese. But Hi Mom takes that character and turns him into this guy who is trying to create a new idea for something called peep art, which is him filming people doing very sort of personal, intimate things. And he sells the idea to this porn / exploitation adult film producer played by Alan Garfield, who is a wonderful improviser, by the way, who is just incredible. And I believe actually was one of Tarantino's acting teachers, but an incredible improvisational machine. And so it's really great to see him and De Niro improvising. But so there's still this idea that De Niro's character lives across the street from a building filled with people that he can look in on, very much Rear Window in its way. And so then it just becomes this comedy of him trying to seduce this woman so he could get it on film. And then there's some wholly other things that he brings into it, including this really remarkable sequence, which is pretty raw and incredible and feels almost out of place in this goofy comedy. But it is this thing that the De Niro character sees an advertisement for, that he can try out for. It's called Be Black Baby. And it is a sort of an immersive theatrical theater experience. And Garrett Graham is part of that. Garrett Graham was part of his stock company. I love all the members of the De Niro stock or the De Palma stock company, but ultimately Garrett Graham is part of this experience, which sets up sort of white upper class people being thrown into a situation with some black actors, if you will. But there's a whole great story behind this whole sequence, and it's about them being painted then in blackface and treated as if they were minorities in the context of how the black actors feel like they're treated. And it turns into this incredible out of control sequence that just goes crazy. And it's just a remarkable thing to watch. And it's really neat to hear De Palma talk about how he didn't introduce any of the actors of this scene, and he just sort of let it play out. And it goes to some dark places. It goes to some insane places, but it is so memorable in the side of this movie, which I think is already very interesting, that it just stands out as a really, really interesting entry into De Palma's filmography. I don't know how you feel about this one or that sequence overall, but it's just a real standout for me.
No, you're absolutely spot on. I think this work, yeah, Hi Mom, I also hold it in very high regard. I understand what you say about it. One way you look at it in the context of these quote unquote early works of De Palma, say in the 60s, and then maybe into the early 70s, pre-Sisters, let's say. And then so that's one way of looking at it. But in actual fact, you're also right, which is this is a really exciting and intriguing period of his filmography. There's a lot going on, and one can say that it might have certain separations or distinctions from, say, the later, the quote unquote, the ones that are quote unquote the ones that De Palma might be very famous for, Sisters and beyond. But in fact, there's so much going on here. For example, Hi Mom, you're absolutely right. There's so much that is so consistent with the rest of his filmography, like this type of almost out of nowhere, as you say, this very famous or infamous sequence, this and then handling the subject matter in a, as you say, raw and a very audacious way. And this is very much in keeping with what I think De Palma does with his cinema. On the one hand, in terms of, say, a type of almost just socio-political cutting edge aspect to it, which is very much in keeping with the cinema that he has during this time. Hi Mom is a great example of this, and also beyond too, when we'll see some of his other works, say into the 70s and 80s and beyond. So that's one thing too. And also there's a way in which that has this great interaction in terms of voyeurism,
Yes.
Who is watching who, and then tables are being turned, and this idea too of the subject object relationship, and maybe is a type of psychological manipulation, but then all of a sudden the tables are turned, and that is very much in keeping with, say, the type of cinema that is at the heart and center of De Palma. It's all from this period, and you see it in, like, I think one of the greatest examples of this is something like, say, like Body Double or something, and that sort of a type of use of cinema in order to draw attention to this idea of the psychological manipulation, which I think is very much part of De Palma's cinema. And it's all here, as well as being, as you say, this type of sexually charged, edgy comedy, which it is, and it has that type of nouvelle vague sensibility about it. So there's so much. I love this. It's a great pick. Yeah, Hi Mom. It's a great pick. Well done.
I think it's underseen for those that, I think if you get into the groove of his thrillers, let's call them that, then you may not, you hear he does some early comedies or something, you may be like, I'm not interested in that. But I do think you're right. There's a lot of things that there's a real connectivity in the tissue of the DNA of what's going on here that comes in. Like, I love that he carries some of this stuff like throughout his career. And it's so neat to see the beginnings where he's sort of figuring it out in a way, but doing a really interesting job figuring out, making an interesting film while he does that. So yeah. I do like the early comedic stuff, because I do think the other thing that's underrated about him is his sense of humor. And I think he really can be very funny, and absurdist. And I think that's another thing that I miss and don't see very much of these days, outside of maybe like Charlie Kaufman or somebody, and a completely absurdist sense of humor, where it's just surreal in its take on comedy, and that I think partially is because that doesn't appeal to a lot of people. It's just something that some people just don't like. They don't like the feeling of, they don't understand. I don't know if they don't understand it, but it just doesn't jibe with them. But moving from this film into my next pick, which is Get to Know Your Rabbit from 1972. This is, I think, a very funny movie, and one that is incredibly absurdist in its comedy construction and takes the joke so far down the line. And that's one of the things I love about absurdist comedy, if it's done right, is you commit to the joke and you carry it through the whole movie. So when you see something like Synecdoche, New York, which is a movie that I love, my wife hates. In fact, I've told the story on my shows before, but when we finished seeing Synecdoche, New York in the theater, she turned and looked at me like I had insulted her she looked so angry at me, and I was like, did I do something and it turned out she was just infuriated by the film. She didn't like that absurdist comedy. But what I love about that movie is it commits to this absurd thing and carries it to this incredible degree. And that's one of the things I love about Kaufman. But so this movie on that level, if you like Charlie Kaufman, I think Get to Know Your Rabbit is maybe your kind of movie. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. The idea is that Tom Smothers, who is interesting in that, and I didn't always realize this, but he obviously had a variety show on television, but was also kind of a countercultural, anti-authoritarian political type, and got himself in trouble with the studio, with the networks because of it. So in that sense, he sort of aligns with De Palma in some ways. And I thought that's interesting. But so he is the lead of this movie, and it has this incredible opening. And I always love this idea too, of this guy works in this corporate job, and his boss is John Astin, who of course we know from the Addams Family and other films. And he just walks out. He just is like, I'm done. He's just, the secretary is trying to give him work on the way out the door. He's like, yeah, I'll call you later. And he just leaves. And the idea is he goes and decides he wants to be a tap dancing musician. And so he commits to going to get tap dancing musician lessons. And he won't even, they're calling him from work. He's like, he's not even answering the phone. He's just like, I don't even want to talk to these people anymore. And I love the idea that he goes and does this thing. His boss continues to call him because everything at work starts to fall apart because he's left. So John Astin starts freaking out, and John Astin finally, once he gets himself trained as a musician, he's about to go on tour. And that whole thing is great because they have sort of a cookie cutter process for training people to be tap dancing magicians, which is hilarious. He finds John Astin again in a bus station, totally disheveled and wiped out from just being the business just fell apart. And then he brings John Astin in to be his manager. And John Astin takes it as an opportunity to sort of start all over again and make a business of sort of selling tap dancing magicians. And sort of becomes this sort of other absurd business corporation thing. And I don't want to get too far into it, except to say that there's a great bit with Orson Welles in it. And the movie is certainly worth watching from that. And there's also some really good overhead shots that De Palma does, which is the beginning of him doing shots where you're seeing the top of the set. And I was just rewatching Kill Bill Volume 2 the other day. And obviously Tarantino is a confessed De Palma fanatic and has definitely borrowed and or incorporated a lot of the visual things that De Palma does into his style. And there was obviously split screens and things like that, but there was a great overhead shot of a set that I was like, oh, this is just like De Palma, just like Get to Know Your Rabbit. Anyway, so there's a lot of fun stuff in here. It's absurdist. I saw you laughing, so I'm assuming you're a fan of this film.
Yeah, it's a very interesting film. It's right. So it's very interesting. So it's on hand because it's part of my own De Palma journey, as it were, or rewatch. So it's one where I think it, as you know from, say, the production history, it's one that probably sits somewhat, say, it does have a somewhat, say, troubled production history from the viewpoint of, say, Brian De Palma's, say, a position as the director, as you know, and as a studio work on the one hand, and yet there is so it's very significant in that respect in terms of the progress of his career. But then, as we also know, it does have it wasn't always a very, say, harmonious production, shall we say, from behind the scenes. So that's one thing to be said about it. However, given all those, say, background details, you're absolutely right. There are flourishes of De Palma that are so obviously there. The comedy is there. The sort of the deftness of touch is there. Suddenly you have Orson Welles appearing, teaching magic, or all this great stuff. It's so Orson Welles. It's wonderful. It has that great F for fake vibe to it. It's wonderful. Absolutely. And then you have those overhead shots, which are stunning. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's in a kind of like a room or a home, and then suddenly it just goes from, like, breaks walls and goes overhead. It's amazing. And you also have like ideas about treatment of sex and sexuality on screen, interwoven with the comedy, interwoven with this corporate or anti-corporatist type of vibe in the air, while still acknowledging the sort of the machine as it. So there's a lot of stuff there, as well as being this type of comedy. So this is a very, very interesting pick. You know, I was so surprised by this choice, very pleasantly so, because because it doesn't come up that often, right, in conversation of De Palma.
No.
So it's a really great choice. Yeah, well done. Yeah, and it's a really fascinating work. I'm glad you focused on it here.
Yeah, it's one that I've come back to a few times, and it's just been like, I really kind of like this. And so anyway, to bring it up here, it seemed like a good idea. I'll try and move a little more quickly through some of these other ones. Sisters, 1972, you already mentioned it. We're starting to see the beginnings of his thrillers here. It's his first real big thriller. We're seeing elements of Rear Window and Psycho. A woman sees a murder and then tries to report to the cops, and it's covered up, and there's some twins, and it's got some really elaborate split screen sequences. And that's one of the things I think is the highlight of that film, is those split screen sequences that stand out. We literally have two things going on for like lengths of time. But it's a really great thriller. It's one that I totally adore, and I know you must be a fan of it too.
Sisters, right?
Yes, Sisters,
yes. I love this film. So it's one of the films that I think, how should I put it? I remember looking at a book before I saw the film. I remember reading through a book. It was like horror films. A book on horror films is a huge thing. It had it was kind of a mini what's it like what encyclopedia of horror films. They have all these famous horror films like The Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and others. And one of the films it featured was Sisters. Nice. And it's you turn it open to that page, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but there is a very famous still photo of one of the stars of the film, Margot Kidder, and she has a kind of look on her face, kind of, and it's one of those, and it's a very key moment, kind of early on in the film, and involving a birthday cake. And so and that was such a shocking picture to see, because I had only known her at the time in my life from Superman. And so yes, it's a great pick indeed.
And bringing back sort of the anti-corporate thing from Get to Know Your Rabbit is one of my very favorites, if not my favorite. It depends on the day, I suppose. And that's Phantom of the Paradise. Just a truly incredible musical, operatic. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. There's very few films like it, and that's one of the things. I think it's such an interesting standout from his filmography, in that it has elements of the other things, but it's also kind of unique onto itself. And I just love the idea that he got the idea to make this film from being around the music business in LA and hearing a Beatles song as Muzak in an elevator. And that led him into this story, this Faustian take on a guy who writes this incredible operatic piece of music, and this incredibly dark, demon-like music producer called Swan, played by Paul Williams, takes that music and then sort of bastardizes it, and it ends up becoming a Phantom of the Opera Faustian thing with incredible music and with Jessica Harper, and you rarely get a combination of so many. So you have Phantom of the Opera, you have Faust, you have this music industry stuff, and you have great songs done by Paul Williams, where he's able to create bands like this band, the Juicy Fruits, that Swan manages, and create them into a band that's like the Beach Boys or something. And there's an amazing sequence, and this is we'll move past this one quickly, but I love it, where he's in his desk, which is a giant record, and there's spotlights on little bands that he's auditioning to do the Faust material. And so there's like 5 little spotlights, 5 little bands doing things, and Paul Williams has written all the music to be like, different bands. And it's just an incredible encapsulation of the deftness with which Paul Williams could write songs and imitate other songwriters, and why he's one of the greatest songwriters that ever lived. So it's just incredible cult movie. I know you must love this one.
How should I explain? Yeah, carburetors, man. That's what life is all about. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Oh gosh. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So
good.
I'm glad you got the reference. Yes, I'm very happy to. So yes, this is one that I share your passion for. This is a key one. William Finley.
Yes.
Oh gosh, and that combination. You know, people speak about with great reason, of course. You know, that great combination of director and actor. I think De Palma and Finley, it's up there. And so here's a great one.
Yeah.
And the musical numbers are just off the charts brilliant. You've got this whole thing about the machine and versus the individual. You've got the great musical numbers. Paul Williams, you're absolutely right. And with this wonderful, and there's this whole thing too about how he had to kind of fix the film in editing so as to,
man.
Oh my, I can't even imagine that, like figuring out that issue happened after everyone was in the can, so to speak, and then trying to figure it out and try to get all the stuff out in time in order to make it legally compliant, as it were. Oh, well done. Yeah, producer. There's a lot there. Yeah.
No, it's just incredible. It's truly unique in an island unto itself inside of a great filmography.
Yeah.
But you did mention Sisters and William Finley, and I should have mentioned William Finley being in Sisters, playing a sort of maniacal villain type, and him sort of evolving him into a different kind of villain in this film. I think is a really interesting connection between those two. And how he's ultimately a much more sympathetic villain, if he's a villain at all in this, but more of a monster. But man, just iconic, absolutely iconic. One of the great cult films of all time, probably my favorite of his works.
Well done.
After that, I would jump ahead. There's so much here, and it's hard to discount anything ultimately, but I would jump ahead to two films that he does back to back in 1980 and 81. In Dressed to Kill and Blowout. I think those two are some of the greatest examples of the cinematic thriller storytelling that we're talking about. Dressed to Kill being another sort of psycho riff with God, I don't want to give away too much if there's people who haven't seen it. But it opens with an incredible sequence with Angie Dickinson and her sort of being picked up at a museum. That's done almost entirely cinematically, almost with no dialogue at all. And it sort of evolves into this thriller that deals with a therapist played by Michael Caine and a kid trying to figure out who has killed his mother. And the kid is very much De Palma himself, played by Keith Gordon. And it's just got tons of cinematically amazing stuff in it. I really like Dressed to Kill a lot. But I think for me, and I don't want to gloss over Dressed to Kill too much, but Blowout is another like quintessential amazing work in his filmography. And I feel like the two go together really well. But Blowout is, again, it's bringing some of the European influence back in that we have both Blow Up, Antonioni's film, and The Conversation. I love that you have multiple films talking to each other. So you have The Conversation, which is inspired by Coppola seeing Blow Up and taking it in an auditory direction. And then both films, The Conversation and Blow Up, De Palma seeing them and saying, let me take it one step further and make it visual, cinematic, and auditory. And it's about a sound guy played by Travolta in one of his best performances ever, who records an accident that a politician has an accident, and he records it, and there's some conspiratorial stuff, which is another thing that comes through De Palma's work all the time. From back in Greetings, when he's obsessed with the JFK assassination stuff, which straight on through, I think that JFK is really a big deal to him, whether he discusses it or not. It's these conspiratorial things. So it becomes this conspiratorial thriller that is so incredibly well done and has some of the best incorporation of his camera techniques in storytelling that I've ever seen. Like some of it, you know, you'll watch the movie. Some of the reasons you and I probably enjoy him is he pulls those techniques in. Sometimes it integrates perfectly into the narrative, sometimes not. I don't mind when it doesn't, but I really feel like Blowout is one of the best examples of that integration into a narrative that works. And I feel like this movie is now getting to be somewhat well known. It just got announced for 4K from Criterion. I'm very excited about that. The fact that it had a Criterion at all is exciting. When I first saw it in the 1990s, it was because, again, Tarantino had listed it as one of his favorite films. It was on a list with Rio Bravo and Big Wednesday and some others. And at that time, it was not that easy to see. It was available as like a Good Times. I'm sure you remember Good Times VHS, like a Good Times VHS, a very cheap company putting it out on VHS. There was an old Warner Brothers tape you could get, but that was hard to find. So it was much harder to see. And I think as a result, it's been really interesting to see it come to prominence in the last 15 years or so. But I know you must love this one.
Yeah, two great picks. Well done, Dress to Kill and Blowout. So let me say, just very quick, I appreciate both of these very much. And also there's so much in Dress to Kill, but as you say, the more one discusses it, the more one reveals what goes on. So perhaps,
yeah,
I understand. There's a lot to say about it, but it's really great.
No, a whole show about it, literally.
It's really fantastic. I agree. And then a Blowout. Let me say one thing or two things, which is, again, so much to say about that too. Great pick. It's iconic, and you're right. Its iconic stature seems to have just catapulted into the stratosphere over the past, say, several years, which is wonderful. And so, there's the. I think this is also so important for De Palma's works, and I don't know if it which is, he has such a way, and it's shown in Blowout, of giving us an emotional resonance with the characters. You mentioned the great performance by John Travolta. It's fantastic. And that interaction between him and Nancy Allen's character, this is the heart and soul of the film. And that emotional resonance is something where you really have, I mean, De Palma is this visual artist. He has this cinematic technique that is fantastic. It is genius. He also has, at his core of his films, these beautifully rendered emotional relationships, character dynamics that really are so needed in order to suspend one's disbelief, to carry on this tension, this suspense, because we are involved with the characters. We love these characters. We hope that they come through at the end. So Blowout is, I think, one of the great examples of that. So well done for bringing that up. Yeah.
No, absolutely. 100% agreed with you across the board. And a movie that, again, I won't spoil the ending, but it's not an ending you would see from a film today. And one thing I should mention, and I was going to wait till the end, but like, obviously you and I are huge fans of the De Palma documentary that was done in 2015 by, I think, Jake Paltrow and Noah Baumbach. That movie is one of my favorite documentaries of the last 20 years because he speaks so frankly about his films, and he goes through just about everything. And just the little nuggets he'll bring up in each bit are just amazing, and it will make you want to watch his film. So I would say if anybody needs a primer, and I don't think you should, but if you need a primer, watch the De Palma documentary because it's amazing. But one thing he brings up in either in that or in the, maybe it was in the interview on the Criterion Blu-ray, which is also by Noah Baumbach, he mentions that the reason the ending was able to be as it was because George Leto, the producer, became the head of Filmways, which is the company that produced the film. And so nobody could tell him no at that point. His producer was the head of the studio. So he gets these incredible breaks that allow for these really remarkable, and that's a movie that slipped through, like, because of that ending and because of everything it's doing. But anyway, we both agree that's wonderful. So I love that. It's again, that's maybe my number one also. So it's like Phantom and Blowout are just amazing stuff. Moving on from that to Body Double in '84. A really interesting, somewhat sleazier take on some similar themes to both Dress to Kill and Blowout. In this case, we have a sort of second-rate actor played by Craig Wasson, who I think is oddly perfect for this role, and that he's got a naivete to him that allows him to be sucked into the plot of the film without spoiling. Again, I know there will be people who haven't seen some of these films, so I don't want to spoil that. But some would say I don't know, like his performance, he maybe isn't the right guy, or his performance might be off, but I actually think it's kind of perfect. And that he's a guy who gets sucked into a scenario where he witnesses, again, a murder, and it becomes this really intricate, involves conspiratorial plot. But it has the milieu of LA and acting in LA, and it has Greg Henry, who's a great character actor that I love, and who will come up later, by the way. It's just got so many great visual sequences. It's a movie that hangs a lot on visual sequences more than plot, and I'm okay with that. But another one I'm sure you dig.
I love Body Double. I think it's so, I mean, as you know, upon its time, its release and maybe beyond, it was considered very controversial among the critic circles and its reaction because of what was regarded as being its very risque subject matter. And it has some very shocking scenes in it, that's for sure. But I think it is also one of the great thriller comedies of De Palma. I really mean that. I mean, you mentioned the great performance of Craig Wasson, right? That is, I think, something where he is almost in a way using these thriller aspects and also aspects of the mystery suspense thriller, which is also has very intense scenes of violence in many ways, but those scenes of violence are also very much in one's head as one is watching it, which is also one of the great aspects of De Palma's cinema, just how much he enables us to imagine the horrifying, which is the great hallmarks of this and other works. But this is also comedy. This is a really fascinating comedy, and it's laugh out loud stuff. And you mentioned at the start some of the great comedies of De Palma, say in his early career, for example, but also it's running through his entire filmography. And I think this is one of the great crisscrosses, if you will, cross sections of sort of the thriller suspense aspect of his cinema, as well as the full-on comedy aspect. And I think this is one of the great examples of that. I think for me, if this would be a go-to film in terms of if you want to get a sense of what Brian De Palma's cinema is, I think this is one of the great places to go. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Agreed. 100%. No, it really does have some dazzling set pieces. There's one in a mall. There's a couple different visual set pieces that he does where he really, I want to say it's not quite the beginning of that, because he does have some great set pieces in both Dressed to Kill and Blowout, and all his films end up having visual set pieces. Not all of them, but the big ones that stand out to me. But yeah, there's some really wonderful ones in this that I just can't get enough of.
And and also let me say one other thing too, which is this is one where it's an example of, right, we know, right, Brian De Palma's films, they're not going to be the most politically correct things ever, you know? And so there's going to be a lot of stuff here that's going to be like, you either go with it or you don't. You know, you don't have to like his films because of certain aspects of how he treats, say, maybe some very potentially sensitive subject matter.
Absolutely.
But that's part of the package. That's part of what's going on in terms of the examination of the use of cinema. And that is itself, I think, very fascinating, as well as there's a lot going on, I think, a part of that. But again, this is, I think, there are a lot of those elements in the film Body Double that I think have the potential for challenging people, and maybe it's going too far for some people, which is totally fine. But at the same time, there is so much there. So I think this is a great pick. Well done. Well done.
Well, I'm glad. I figured you were a fan. In fact, I know that probably most of my picks you'll be a fan of, but yeah, that one in particular, I agree, is a good place to start with him, maybe. But see, now we're going into another phase with my next pick. So we have sort of the thriller phase, and then we get into a phase where he's still doing thrillers, but he's trying to be more commercial. He's coming off of a failure, and then he comes into The Untouchables in 1987. And that, to me, in rewatching this one on the new 4K from Paramount, I realized that this film was way more seminal than I had even initially conceived. Like, I always talk about Big Trouble in Little China from Carpenter as a real big gateway movie for me that I saw in the theaters in 1986. And I was just like, wow, what was that? I just don't even know. And I would come back to it, and it's still a favorite of mine. The Untouchables was for me in some ways like that, in that I saw it when I was about 13 years old, and it was R-rated and it was very violent. It may have been my first exposure to De Palma proper that I know of, that I can remember. And it is a commercial juggernaut, but it has got so much De Palma in it that at the time I wouldn't even realize how much. But it's also really interesting because it is him bringing De Niro back into the fray as Al Capone. The idea is obviously it's a story of prohibition and gangsters and things like that, and trying to take down Capone. And De Niro is incredible as Al Capone. And there's a great story on the Blu-ray about how hard it was to get him cast, and how De Niro basically De Palma doubled down and said, basically, I can't make it without him. And he's right, because it isn't the same movie without him. But the other thing that's interesting is the cast is Kevin Costner and, Andy Garcia, who I love, who was cast because of 8 Million Ways to Die. And I love that movie is also coming to prominence in the last several years too. And the idea that Costner was not the superstar that we know him as now, he was actually almost unknown at the time. He's relatively under the radar, and it becomes this incredible, like I said, commercial juggernaut, and just incredible film thriller that incorporates, of course, Sean Connery as one of the other cast members, and an incredible Morricone score that is just so iconic. I think as iconic as anything he's ever done, and a David Mamet script. And it's just got some, like, between the railroads, the station sequence, basically the Eisenstein sequence that he more or less sort of figured out, in the moment, not in the moment, but around the time they were making it, which is incredible. It's such a great sequence. And the sequence with Costner and the Billy Drago character on the roof, and the resulting sequence of that. I just remember as a kid being like, wow, this movie is just something I've never seen before. So this one just really, it stood out to me as De Palma doing a sort of a blockbuster thing, but also trying to figure out ways to do it differently, and yeah, it's just incredible. I just really, really love it. It stands out.
Well done. Well done. Yes. Yes. Well, where is he? Well, he's in the car. Yeah. 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 So yes. Yeah. I don't know. I can't. Yeah. That's a great pick. Yeah. That's a great pick. It's a classic. I love The Untouchables.
I've forgotten how much I love it. And it's just struck me to my core. Like, I'm like, wow, this is a part of my cinematic DNA that I didn't even realize had left such a mark on me at that time. And then I started to remember that he's in the car sequence, and like, just being like, I've never seen a sequence like that. I've never seen a villain dispatched in that way at that time for me, that I was so satisfied by. And at the same time, I was a little disturbed that I was so satisfied by. I don't think it was something I fully realized at the time, but I was just like, that was disturbing, and I really liked it. And I don't know how I feel about that, but I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great pick as well. As you say, it's the perfect mix of the blockbuster entertainment and the De Palma cinematic sensibility. You're absolutely right. It's just like the perfect storm. Everything was just right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
He just nailed it. He just nailed it. I love it. Yeah. Moving on from that, he obviously would go into Mission Impossible. He gets into this blockbuster mode. Yeah. Yeah. And then he does another thriller that's kind of harkening back to Scarface, which I leapt over, but I do think is an interesting entry, and certainly a movie that I think a lot of people know and love. But he comes back to work with Al Pacino in Carlito's Way in 1993. And I adore this film as well. I just think it's doing the gangster thing again. It's almost like Scorsese does Goodfellas in 1990, and that blows up. And I'm not saying that I've seen him talk about this specifically, but it's almost like him going like, well, I can do a gangster movie. Let me try my hand at it. And he had already done it, obviously, in Scarface. It's not like he wasn't already doing it, but I feel like it feels like a response to Goodfellas. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But it's just a great, story of this gangster who's trying to go straight, played by Pacino, and his skeevy lawyer, played by Sean Penn, in a remarkable performance. And just sort of things keep getting crazier and crazier kind of gangster story. But it opens in that film noir way with basically him getting shot. An incredible camera sequence where the camera flips over and it's tracking over him, and it's just a wonderful De Palma sequence. This may have been like the second or third De Palma movie that I saw, and I think I was aware at the time of like, wow, I don't know if I thought elaborate, but I was like, I don't think I've seen, because there aren't many opening sequences like that where the camera flips over and it's like following following Al Pacino's character as he's on the stretcher and starts to recount the last few years of his life. So it's very film noir in that way, very old school gangster, and just a great Pacino performance. Has some incredible sequences. There's also a nod directly to Scorsese. I'm sure more than one, but there's a scene where he uses the song El Watusi by Ray Barretto, which is one of my favorite songs I've ever heard in a Scorsese film, which he uses in Who's That Knocking at My Door. There's a great suspenseful sequence early on in Carlito's Way that takes place in a bar, a small club. And they actually acknowledge the song. Like one of the guys in the scene is like, "Hey, turn that up." And I'm like, wow, okay, he's really nodding at Marty there, I think. But it's another great use of that song because it's a really upbeat sort of song, and it just really makes the tension that much better. And I don't know, I love it. It's, a wonderful performance from Pacino, Penelope Ann Miller, gorgeous and wonderful in the film. And again, Sean Penn, just unstoppable as just this ridiculous lawyer. And an early Viggo Mortensen for me, maybe my first exposure to Viggo Mortensen in a great little bit part. But yeah, I love it. I just think it's such a great Louis Guzman. Oh, Louis Guzman's great too. Yeah, just a really great suspenseful gangster film.
You're exactly. Your Carlito's Way is one of the best. So just a few things very briefly. Watch out if there's any stairs or escalators in a De Palma film. So that's one thing. Other two, yeah, this is film noir. This is film noir gangster film to the max. This is like Sunset Boulevard. This is like De Palma's Sunset Boulevard.
Yes.
Right? The opening especially, right? And then also, yes, that combination. And also, yes, you mentioned the bars. Watch out if there's anyone who's wearing, sunglasses that are like mirrors, because watch out. So if anyone's wearing sunglasses in a De Palma film, if there's escalators or stairs in a De Palma film, just watch out. If you're just walking and you're in a De Palma film like world and you're just walking and there's stairs, just go in the other way. Just go the other direction because there's gonna be trouble. So just walk the other way. Because that's great stuff. Yeah, classic. Well done. I love that choice.
Yeah, it's such a good one. And that's another one that got a 4K recently. And I came back to it and was like, yep, this is still as good as I remember. Really held up for me. And then moving into a couple more of the latter period stuff that I think is still thrillers, but I feel like it harkens back to his earlier work. And these are both, I think, strong, enjoyable. Again, I'm quite sure that you're a fan of both of these. I'll start with Snake Eyes in 1998, which, I mean, talk about an incredible opening sequence. Just a ridiculous steady cam shot that's, I want to say 7 or 8 minutes or something. I forget how long. Oh no, wait, 13:28. I timed it out. The opening steady cam shot before the cut seems to be 13 minutes and 28 seconds. And it's following Nicolas Cage, who plays a kind of a corrupt Atlantic City cop who's going into a fight. It's fight night and we're following him through. And I think it's lovely too that Cage is given the opportunity to let this scene play out in a 13-minute take, and he's asked to do a lot in that 13 minutes. But again, very classic noir setup. It's along the lines of Robert Wise's The Setup, and it's sort of ramped into the De Palma paranoid political thriller, sort of a Rashomon type take on. So it's again cinematically experimental in some sense. And it's him mushing a lot of things together, but I really do think it works. I really do think, I wish he and Cage had done more stuff together, because I think it's a great performance for him, but it's full of the De Palma's favorite things: split diopters, split screens, a great callback to the overhead bedroom shot from Get to Know Your Rabbit. They use that in a sort of a hotel room sequence where they're going over multiple rooms. And I'm like, oh, this reminds me of Get to Know Your Rabbit. He's doing that again. And it's fun to see this one play. As silly as the conspiracy sort of, and maybe obvious as the conspiracy might get, it's still just a beautiful thing to watch and a really fun thriller. I would imagine you're a fan.
Very much so. I love Snake Eyes. Yes, yes. It is the conspiracy thriller, political thriller, intrigue aspect. There's also a kind of Rashomon. I love how you mentioned
Yes.
that. There's also like a locked room. I mean, it's there's a lot of rooms, I know, but it's a kind of locked room mystery in a way, in terms of this event hall or room or series of rooms, but it's in this closed setting. So it also has that type of Phantom of the Paradise type of concert hall slash
Oh yeah.
event hall space vibe to it as well. Also, you know, what are you seeing? Is it really what's the truth? Also, everything's happening at once, and there's a hurricane. All this stuff is happening at once. It's great, great stuff. Yeah, well done. I enjoy this film very much. Yeah, it should be, I think, watched more and more regarded more, I think, and hopefully it will be over time. I love that film.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the increased appreciation for Nicolas Cage in the last several years, which I'm sure like you and I have never not appreciated Nicolas Cage, but I feel like people are appreciating more since Mandy and Pig and all these. I hope people will go back and watch a film like this, because I do feel like it got a little bit of the shaft at the time. And I think it's ripe for reexamination. I don't think it's a classic film necessarily, but I do think it's a wonderful watch. I think it's a great movie to watch and holds up better than a lot of recent thrillers I've seen by far. So I like that a lot. But just the noir aspects of it and how that carries into my last pick, which is Femme Fatale from 2002, which is, just a real, again, him doing noir stuff. He's audacious enough, if you will, to have his character opening the movie by laying on a bed half naked, watching Double Indemnity on French television. So he's really calling his shot. He's pointing to the bleachers and saying, hey, I know this movie. I'm going to do something for you guys. Check it out. And another sort of, a lot of it's what you said about Snake Eyes. There's a certain unreliable nature to the point of views and the things that we're seeing. Can you really believe what you're seeing? That's a really key thing to Femme Fatale. It opens with this really remarkable, intricate diamond heist, but not a diamond heist in the sense that we're used to in terms of what diamonds are being stolen. I would really like to leave it as less of the plot that I can bring into this is more like general things, because again, I feel like there's a lot of these movies that people haven't seen or maybe saw once and don't remember. Like I didn't remember some of the big turns in Femme Fatale. I remembered vaguely them, but then I was like, oh wow, okay, now I remember why this one stood out to me, is this particular thing. But there's double crosses, identity switches, De Palma trademarks, POVs, cameras, split screens, slow motion. Slow motion's another thing he does a lot. He does that in Carlitos. He does it all the time. I should have brought it up as almost a regular cinematic device where he's able to find a specific place to slow things down and really draw your attention to it and make it beautiful and again, cinematic in that way. But yeah, it's got a lot of kind of, I don't want to say cheap, but sort of tropes of noir films rolled into it. And yet it's very sexy and really just energetic and vibrant in this way that you kind of wouldn't expect from him at this point in his career. And I love that it also just recently got a nice Blu-ray from Scream Factory. So I love that he's actually treated really well on physical media, that the powers that be realize that we like him and there's not too many of his films that aren't on Blu-ray at this point. But it was really nice to see this one again on Blu-ray and know that people appreciate it. It's built up its cult following, which I'm sure you're a part of.
Yeah. I was able to, I ordered that Blu-ray that you speak of and then got it in the mail and I rewatched it immediately. And I fell in love with it again for all the reasons that you described. It is something else. It is dazzling. It is, must be seen to be believed. And actually, can we believe what we are seeing? Exactly. Yeah. And the way that time is treated, the way that reality and fantasy are treated. Oh, it's top stuff. Well done. I love that pick.
Yeah, and in Body Double Connection, that Greg Henry returns to this film, and he's very good in it. And they do an interview with him.
Yeah, that's right.
On the Blu-ray, which is great.
Yeah.
And Rebecca Romaine Stamos is just really pretty incredible in the film. Like there's something about her voice. She's got a different voice than you would expect that she would have, but it works in this really unique way to make her sexy and believable and I don't know. I can't even describe what it is about her, but she works wonderfully in the film.
Multifaceted role. Let's put
Very
it.
much.
Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, so that's my, I mean, there's so many that I could have included, but those are just a smattering of some favorites from me that I think if you watch these 11 films, I would like to think that you'll be a fan. If you're inclined at all to like his work, I think if you watch these 11, you will hopefully be hooked and want to see some more. That's my idea.
No, I love it. That's a great list. That's a great list. And as you say, there are, of course, other great films that we didn't have time to talk about today, obviously, but that doesn't mean that we dislike those films that weren't mentioned. It was just
Not at all.
Yeah, we wanted to talk about these films. These are great choices, absolutely
Thank
great choices. So I know that maybe we are a little bit limited in time, so maybe we can maybe if you want to provide some maybe closing comments about De Palma and just your general impressions, or maybe other places that people can go if after they've examined your list here.
Well, like I said, I'll bring it back to the De Palma documentary. I think if you, I don't know, if there are a lot of those films that are about a filmmaker and they tend to be good but not great for me, like they just, for whatever reason, if I love a filmmaker, they aren't always able to capture everything that I want about the greatness of that person. It just doesn't quite, but that's one where it's literally just him sitting in front of a fireplace talking about his movies and them showing clips. And it is one of the most invigorating watches. And he's so nonchalant about it and sort of humble, maybe, I don't know, just sort of like at a place in his life where he's fully comfortable with himself and the successes and the failures, and is just sort of able to look back and go, yeah, I had a wild and crazy ride. And I'm not saying he's done either. It's just this idea of like, he can look back and with some humility and talk about his mistakes and some other things. So, I don't know, so well that I just think if you need to encapsulate him, watch that documentary. I really can't. I think it was on Canopy for a while. You could watch it for free there. I feel like it's obviously for rental digitally and available on Blu-ray, but I just can't recommend that one enough. It really is the kind of thing where if you were a fan of him for a long time and you fell away for whatever reason and you come and see that documentary, it immediately pulls you back in. It just gives you such a great sense of his ideas about filmmaking, which I think are all very interesting. And I can't even encapsulate all of them in a succinct closing statement. He just brings up so many things that he's doing and trying to examine in that documentary that you see play out in the work, that I have to point to that documentary as the thing to, yes, exactly.
Well done. Yeah, I agree with you and your assessment of the documentary. It's one of the best. It's absolutely one of the best, and it's so perfect. And you're right. He's very critical. He's very humble, and he's very honest, which is so refreshing. So, well done for that. This is really, really great. This is absolutely fantastic, Brian.
Well, thank you so much for having me to talk about these.
And I know you're busy with a lot of things, so thank you for taking the time to do this. I very much appreciate it, and I hope that we can do this again very soon. I don't want to go without letting people know about where people can find you. There are many places online, great places online where people can find you and reach out to you, because you have a lot that you offer to people like me and the rest of us who are fans of cinema and the like. So where can people find you, Brian? Podcasting, YouTube, and otherwise, please. For anyone who's meeting you for the first time.
Oh, that's very kind. I have a couple podcasts. I have one called Pure Cinema Podcast I do with my friend Albert Kane for the New Beverly Cinema in Los Angeles. Cult Film Podcast. We talk about a lot of different things. We've had some fun guests on that show. I also do Just the Discs, which is a physical media and Blu-ray focused podcast and YouTube channel. Definitely check out the YouTube channel. That's been a lot of my focus lately, is videos for that, which then in turn end up as part of the podcast. But I've been doing both podcasts for about 5.5 years, and take up a lot of my time and energy, to say the least.
And I think, yes, so that can also be found. You also have it, that's on YouTube as well, right?
Yes, YouTube, Just the Dis, YouTube channel, Just the Dis Pod on Instagram and Twitter, Pure Cinema Pod on Instagram and Twitter. Check those out if you're into the social stuff. You'll find me talking about movies and tweeting out and putting out episodes that we launch every couple weeks or so.
So all that information will be in the description box of this video. So for anyone who hasn't checked those out yet, please do so. They're really great. Subscribe to those channels or leave behind reviews for those podcasts. It really helps. It really helps, very much so. So for example, for Brian's YouTube channel, which will again be below, if you haven't checked it out, check out those videos and subscribe, because they're really great. And then the podcast episodes, they're really fantastic. So
thank you so much, Daisuke.
all that will be in. No. We appreciate you. I know how much work this is, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of effort, but I know you do it because it's also fun and it's part of who you are. So we appreciate everything that you do. So, and you do a lot for us. So thank you.
And
so much,
you
Brian.
do the same, sir. You do quite a bit yourself.
No. I don't do it. I don't do a tenth, 1.00. I don't do what you do, my friend. So thank you very much for being a great inspiration. And thank you so much for the conversation today, my dear friend.
It was absolutely my pleasure, sir. Thank you again.
Let's do it again very soon.
100%.